of like performative outrage on this because this is why it pisses me off because this is supposed to be like your Fox Business or Fox News or whatever. You're supposed to be news or finance, and this is why Fox Business is a joke because financial people, financial news, there is a slant, and it does tend to be a little bit more of a right-wing slant because basically finance people don't like taxes. They don't like regulations because it's hard for us to rip people off and make more money. It's just a fact. And so they tend to be more conservative, which is part of the reason we started this show, is to sort of put a spotlight on why that's bad and wrong, because the rest of the time, we do tend to like a lot of liberal policies, like, oh, I don't know, government investment into programs and things like that, because that's also a way to make money. And when middle and lower income people have more money, we make a lot more money because we're selling more. Right? So, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, but the beauty of the financial news is this. Is it biased? Yes, but the one thing you can pretty much count on with the bias all around, unless it's some political hack, is the one thing they only are biased towards is what's going to make me more money. Right? So their self-interest is so transparent, you kind of have to sort of respect them. Doesn't mean you have to trust them or like them, but at least you know where they're coming from. As opposed to Fox Business, which tries to hide it, which is they're really coming from, well, we're trying to spin an election sort of position, but we're not going to tell you that. We're going to make it look like it's actual financial news. And here's the master of it, Larry Kudlow, the guy who said the pandemic was going away when 1,000 people a day were dying. Right? Dipshit Kudlow on Fox Business, and he's going to whine about the debt. Which is what they always do when there's a Democrat. When they're in office, they never say shit about the debt. Because they drive it up worse, right, the Republicans. But here's Larry Kudlow to cry about it like a little baby.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. First up tonight, soaring U.S. debt is a spending problem that threatens higher inflation and higher interest rates and a whole bunch of financial problems. And that's the subject of the riff. U.S. government finances are an absolute mess, that according to the latest Congressional Budget Office report. Across the board, spending, deficits, debt, all moving in the wrong direction. There is no excuse for it, and there is certainly no economic justification for it.
Okay. He's wrong. He's just flat out wrong. So, the highest spending in debt under any president was Trump, who in 4 years spent, what was it, $8 trillion, something like that? It was over $8 trillion. But over half of that was prior to the pandemic. So the pandemic, he didn't really spend that much more during the pandemic than he did prior. In the first couple of years he was in office. So you can say that, but Biden's got spending actually way down from where it used to be. So Larry Kudlow's already kind of full of shit here. I mean, it's kind of a joke. So let me go here. Let me move over to this to show you. This is just Fred. It's the St. Louis Federal Reserve. And this is, I want to show you this. So this is the deficit, right? So this is annual spending. It's not the overall debt. It's just annual spending, right? So versus revenue, what we bring in taxes. So you notice for most of this country's history, right, back especially when taxes were really, we had a high nominal tax rate, it was really good. And then in the 70s, they had the oil embargo and stuff was bad. And then Reagan gets into office, really lowers the tax rate, and it starts to go way down, right? And then Clinton actually builds up a surplus by the time he leaves office. And then Bush Jr. gets us into all kinds of wars and blows a ton of money, and boom, gets us into this gray bar here, the debt, the financial housing crisis. Let me scoot up a little bit. So here's the housing crisis, this big gray area, 2008, and then it was pretty going back up under Obama, going back up, it was doing okay, and then Trump becomes president, and COVID and Trump spending, and blam! It bottoms out under Trump in 2020, and then Biden becomes president. And look, the deficit starts getting better, and we're spending less. So they're like 1.9 trillion. I'm sorry. I mean, under Trump, it was 3 at the peak. It was all over $1 trillion. His first in 2019. I mean, and that's the spending. When he says 1.9 trillion, that's also the trip. He's not talking about that in comparison to revenue from taxes and other things, because the one thing he's going to skip here is we made a ton of money. I don't know the exact figure. I could look it up later, but Biden did this. So Biden finally kind of broke OPEC, which Hillary Clinton wanted to do forever and Bill Clinton wanted to do. So OPEC is the oil petroleum exporting countries. So it's a lot of our enemies. Russia, Saudi Arabia is an ally, I guess. But, Argentina was in there for a while. You know what I'm talking about. But
it's a rough crew, to say the least. It's a little bit of a rough crew.
Yeah.
Rough combination for agreeing on things. Let's just put it that way.
Well, right. And they're not really U.S. friendly. Well, I don't know if you guys remember, after COVID, gas prices were down because no one was driving. So gas prices plummeted. And so OPEC decided, because they were making less money, decided to produce less oil to jack up the prices on us and get them back up. They were trying to get them up to like $8 or $9 a gallon at the gas pump for you and me, like it used to be in the 2008 housing crisis and all that era. So what Biden did was he took a chunk of our, like 40% of our oil reserves, right? And he sold them at the peak, right? As oil prices were going up. And he sold them here in the U.S., but he also sold them a little bit overseas and stuff. And then when the prices came down, what did he do? He bought a bunch of oil at the lower price and refilled the stockpile of our oil reserve. And it wasn't even his idea. This idea, Obama was playing with this idea years ago. Hillary played with this idea and Bill Clinton played with this idea back in the 90s to break OPEC. Because the one thing that can really damage our economy is if OPEC fucks with us. And they have before. That's what killed Jimmy Carter. OPEC did an embargo. And so people lining up at the gas station, there were lines for miles because it was the only gas station with gas. Right? So this whole thing, Biden broke OPEC, made a fortune on it for the government, right? And now, okay, we have a little bit higher deficit spending this year. Okay, big deal. On top of that fact, the reality is it's not really that big of a deal overall, because people keep talking about, well, if the debt gets too high and whatnot, it's going to jack up interest rates and da-da-da. They've been saying that for 40 years. And it's not really been the case. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying the thing about it is it has to come down to your spending, your annual, what you owe every year on interest. If you can't afford that, that's going to be a problem. Or if demand for debt goes down. But in a good economy, demand for debt is high, which it is right now. And so it's kind of backwards what his logic is here. He's not really making a ton of sense. And I want to show you this. So this was also years ago, because what he's referring to with the interest rates and it causing a problem, the debt to GDP ratio and all that stuff, this was all debunked years ago. And I wanted to pull this. This is an old clip from Stephen Colbert when he had still the Colbert Show, where he covered this, and it's really stupid.
Colbert last week in this clip.
In bad times, you have to slash government spending. Now, I don't need some fancy Ivy League paper to tell me that, because there's already a fancy Ivy League paper to tell me that. The famous 2010 study, Growth in a Time of Debt, by Harvard economists Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart. And you gotta think Harvard economists understand debt almost as much as Harvard graduates.
But this was the famous study that they said, look, this is why we need to cut spending, cut social programs, which really aren't a huge issue. We need to cut Social Security completely. Just get rid of it because it's too expensive. Cut Medicare and Medicaid completely, which would destroy millions of people's lives. I mean, tens and tens of millions of Americans would go instantly into poverty, right? But that's what they kept pressing, and that's what Kudlow's pressing now is we need to do that because Biden's being irresponsible, even though Trump spent more money than any other president in history. And he spent more than any two presidents combined. and he did it in 4 years. But this whole thing with the debt and this austerity and we need to cut all this stuff was all kind of bullshit. But I want to tell you, so that was the study they did, Rogoff and Reinhardt, and that's the one they cited. And they said at a certain point, if debt gets too high compared to GDP, you're going to see rising interest rates, lower demand for debt, and it's going to cause rising inflation and really damage the economy. That was their assessment. Here's what happened to that study that people cited for years.
Out back in this clip.
Not only has Congress been inspired by Rogaine and Braveheart's math, their work has influenced international budget slashers like EU Economics Commissioner Olli Rehn, former European Central Bank President Jean-Claude Trichet, Bundesbank President Jens Wiedmann, and Lord Lamont of Lerwick, who is not only the former Chancellor of the Exchequer for the United Kingdom, but gets killed by Lady Mary in the next season of Downton Abbey.
But what's not so funny is
Well, so we'll skip into this. So that's part of it, but this is what we found out later on. I'm going to skip to the next part here.
this clip.
Herndon's corrected spreadsheets show that countries with debt over 90% did not see their economies shrink minus 0.1%, but instead saw them grow 2.2%. But come on, 2.2% up, 0.1% down. You say potato, I say eliminate food stamps.
Now, I hope those who want...
So, for those of you who don't remember, they tried to do austerity with the Tea Party under Obama. And at the same time they were doing that, this kid, Thomas Herndon, who was going to UMass, and he was doing his PhD, wanted to do a study and review Rogoff and Reinhardt's study, right? But they had never had it peer-reviewed or released the data. And yet, all these countries did austerity, Greece and the UK, and they talked about doing that here. And it immiserated millions of people. Poor people couldn't get food, couldn't get health care, couldn't get anything. It was immiserating. I mean, hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Because of this paper that was never peer-reviewed. So this kid, Thomas Herndon, while he was working on his PhD, asked them, hey, can I get the data to review it? They sent it to him, which is pretty common. And he found their spreadsheet error in the first 20 minutes of looking at it. And found that their whole conclusion, all the evidence was wrong. And that's not what actually happens. Plus, they ignored countries like Canada and Australia, who saw growth even amongst high debt.
How could you shut out those two countries? I mean...
Because it doesn't give you the answer you want.
That's... Well, yeah. You know, the truth of the matter is when you're looking at any study, though, one of the things in terms of doing good research is to take a moment to look at who is funding said research, who is conducting said research,
right?
And if they have some reason to want the data to go a certain way, you know, and to look at what is being left out. Because if you look at what's being left out, geez, why would we leave out two countries that really have quite a lot of data to contribute, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
We're not saying these are like nothing little like blip on the radar countries. Not that I want to discount anybody, but these are not like countries that have like just itty bitty little chunks of data where it's not going to make any difference either way. You know, these are huge countries.
Absolutely. But knowing all that, Larry Kudlow's bitching about this, saying all this stuff, and it's all bullshit. And we'll watch another minute of him. But now that you know, he's full of shit. Because his boy Trump, while he was working for Trump as an advisor and a financial advisor under Trump, all right, he was in his cabinet. They ran up the biggest deficit and increased the debt by more than any other presidential, administration in the history of this country. And you can do that by percentage or by total amount. However you want to spin it.
This is big government socialism on a tear. And at some point, you have to ask, with all this spending and borrowing, will the Federal Reserve be forced to enable the government's faltering finances by creating too much cash and thus reviving inflation? And you also have to ask, when will government borrowing rates in the bond market start heading back up? So, listen to this.
They won't. That's the point, Larry. We know they don't. Not the degree you're thinking of. On top of that fact, this is hilarious. Let me give you a great analogy for this. Let's say I have $200,000 in credit card debt, and I'm under indictment from the IRS for not paying my taxes, and I owe them $1 million. And Lacey decides to buy a new car, and I say to Lacey, "Hey, Lacey, I think you have a spending problem."
I love that we're giving me the spending problem in this scenario just for fun to like flip this whole thing.
Well, but the thing about it is, that's not a spending problem.
No.
Why would you listen to me, who's in massive debt and looking at going to jail because I can't pay my taxes, bitching to Lacey about, "I don't think you can control your spending." I mean, it would be like Jeffrey Dahmer going, I think you have a problem with killing people. Because you saw a movie. I mean, that's the thing. Larry Kudlow oversaw the biggest deficit in U.S. history under Trump. And now he's bitching about it on Fox News? Now, Larry? Now you're worried about it? You're the guy who fucking drove it into the ground.
True.
Fucking kill. I hate that guy so much. I love to hate him, though.
And you can walk on making a really great face, by the way. I know I'm not contributing anything to real content here, but let's just look at that face for a second.
Oh, right here. Yeah.
You know?
He's such a douchebag. And Mr.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
man.
Mr. It's socialism that's a problem. You guys oversaw the PPP loans and the EIDL loans where you gave like $1 trillion to people who really didn't need it. And I know because I was there. I had a lot of clients who owned small businesses. I must have applied for like 80 or 90 PPP loans. And a lot of us got them. We didn't need them. And a lot of them were forgiven. We were given free money by the government during a pandemic for business owners who didn't need it. You know who could have used that money? Oh, I don't know. Fucking people who are hungry. People who need Medicare, Medicaid.
Okay, well, I'm gonna throw out there my 2 cents. I'm certainly not mad that they made that available because I wanted that there for people who tend to fall through the cracks on other types of aid.
Oh, sure, but
However, I mean, they could have gone about it in maybe a cleaner way, I suppose.
my big complaint about it was, no, I'm with you exactly in that. It wasn't a bad idea, but the way it was executed, it didn't get to the people who really needed it. They basically
Right,
gave
the
it to
execution
wealthy businesses. They didn't give it to the poor people.
You know, I'm also going to say there, I don't necessarily love, making excuses for poorly executed things, but I will give that in that scenario when it was really imperative that something happened quickly, it may have really felt like a scenario where there wasn't enough time to put a lot of deliberate thought into how that was executed, so much as get it out there,
Right. Yeah, but
and I'm sure that was a part of it too, because it's like panic, when there's an emergency and people, just panic and try to do the best thing that they think they can do at the time. And then you look back and go, geez, that maybe could have gone differently. But at the time you were panicking, right? So
yeah, but a lot of that was Kushner and whatnot. They were overseeing that. They just fucked it up. And Kudlow was a part of that whole thing too. I mean, so you can't bitch about socialism when you're giving out free money to the rich and wealthy businesses during the pandemic, but you're not really taking care of the people who are really struggling. And you can't sit there and bitch about we have a debt or deficit problem when you were part of the administration that ran it up more than anybody else. I mean, honestly, if Larry Kudlow got out there and said, hey, kids, let me tell you what not to do because I did it and I know how bad it is. That would be truthful. And I would have some respect for the guy. But to get up there and bitch about the current administration like he fucking knows better, like he's the genius here, I'm like, Jesus, Larry, why don't you lie to me some more? Pull my other leg, it has bells on it. Dickhead.